This is one of the biggest crime mysteries in the past century. How did an ordinary family home in Gloucester turn into an sex dungeon for wild young girl fantasies before 12 girls were later found buried within the walls, floors and gardens of this property? This is the full story of Fred and Rose West. Part 1. Growing Up. Fred West grew up for much of his younger life in the picturesque village of Muchmarcle in the English country of Herefordshire, surrounded by trees, flowers and rolling fields. His mother Daisy had worked in domestic services, while his father Walter was a farm labourer. His family were not particularly well educated. His father could not read or write, and they had very little money. They lived in a small cottage on a farm where his father Walter worked. There was no running water to the property, and the family were often seen walking back and forth with buckets to fetch water. They bathed in old tin baths in front of the open fire, as many did back then. In 1941, the couple had had their first child and named him Fred. He was followed in quick succession by 3 brothers and 3 sisters. Before Fred had been born, the couple had given birth to a baby named Violet, although unfortunately she had passed away during infancy, and Fred was now the oldest. The family now were quite big. There was very little space in the cottage. The children shared beds and spent all of their time together. They helped their father around the farm, and the girls helped their mother pick vegetables and cook for the family. From outside, it seemed to be a very normal country family for that time period, but it was said that somewhere along the line, things started to happen within the family that shouldn't have. One thing said was that Fred, being the oldest and his mother's favourite child, now turned 12, had been told by his mother that he needed to sleep with her, and apparently lost his virginity to her. Now, it was also said by Fred that his father had taught him how to have sex with sheep. His mother was described as pernicious. She was a strong character. She would shoot rats around the house and farm and was the one in charge of the family and the children. But one thing she also did was always take Fred's side over disputes with his father or the other children. Another thing said about his upbringing was that he would regularly be asked to slaughter animals for the family to eat, although Fred's brother stated that this was not the case, as the farm already had a pig killer on it, and that was his job. His brother also disputes that anything sex related happened within the family. He states this did not happen, and the family was just a normal one. He feels that these things, later told by Fred to police, were in his head. Now we're going to talk about Rose West. She was born over 150 miles away in northern Devon. Rose's mother was also named Daisy. She married a man named Bill. Rose was the youngest daughter within 7 siblings. Bill was described as a tyrant. He would suddenly shout from nowhere, making the kids jump. Everyone had to be quiet as possible due to his temper. And the saying went, children should be seen and not heard. The kids went to school, but after that they would come straight home, and they were rarely seen outside the house. A father would run his finger along the edges of furniture looking for a speck of dust, and it would suddenly set him off. He would start smashing up the house, throwing things around and regularly assaulting her mother and beating the children. He once threw one of the daughters downstairs and thrust another's head into a wall. When Daisy, the mother, intervened, he would grab a pan of boiling water off the stove that she had boiled to make a cup of tea and throw it over her. One day, a neighbour had taken the oldest of the daughters down to the beach, and when she got back, her father was waiting. He was mad. He hose-piped her down outside and gave her the beating of her life. In 1953, Rose's mother Daisy was now 8 months pregnant with her. She was spiraling into a deep depression. Doctors trying to help Daisy at the time, and not seeming to mind that she was 8 months pregnant, decided to administer electroconvulsive therapy to her head. Electrodes were placed on her skull, and electrical impulses were passed through her brain. It certainly looked quite barbaric, but at the time it was something doctors used to treat depression and other mental illnesses. Rose was born 1 month later, on the 29th of November 1953. Her mother was still struggling. She also had all of the other kids to take care of. A husband who treated her so badly. It was not the best start in life, but Rose was a beautiful girl with big dark eyes and thick glossy brown hair. The family called her Dozy Rosie, as she would sit in the middle of the floor and rock herself back and forwards, almost self-soothing, and seemingly in a world of her own. At school, Rose found it hard to fit in. She struggled to keep up with the work and didn't understand things as quickly as everybody else. It didn't take long before her peers started teasing her. She ended up repeating a year to try and catch up, but despite being bullied and teased at school, Rose, the youngest of the family, seemed to be her father's favourite. He did not knock her around like the others and would treat her differently. Rose would sit on her own, cutting up sheets to make clothes for her dolls, and lived in a world where control and abusive behaviour seemed to be normalised. She was able to disassociate from it all in order to protect herself. She had a way of doing her own thing and storing all of it away. It was said that at some point during her childhood, her father started touching her, and this turned into him coming into her room at night. Being protected by her father made her learn how to manipulate a situation to get what she wanted. By 1956, Fred West had left school. He was now 15, and he had a reading and writing age of about 7 years old. Having experience working on the farm and helping his father, Fred got a job working on another farm in Muchmarkle. In Ledbury, a few miles away, a local pub was heard to be a good place to meet women. Him and his brother discussed getting dressed up and going over to see who they could meet. But for Fred, meeting a woman was not, let's get a drink and have a little chat and a kiss. It was pulling girls away from their groups on the proviso of a conversation, dragging them off to have sex with them. Fred felt he was Jack the Lad. He walked around like a big man and felt he could pull anyone he wanted. But this sometimes caused tensions with other men, and when this happened, Fred was a coward. He had no idea what to do and would just run away. When Fred turned 17, he bought himself a motorbike with money that he'd saved up from working on the farm. He took great pride in his bike, cleaning and polishing it each weekend. But on one evening, Fred was driving home when he saw a girl on a pedal cycle. She was going in the opposite direction. The two collided. The girl luckily came off with a few scrapes and cuts, but for Fred, he came off worst. This was a time when bike helmets were not compulsory. Fred lay in the road, his head pouring with blood. He was unconscious and had a fractured skull and other fractures to his leg. The girl ran to get help in a time when mobile phones were not around. Fred was driven by ambulance to the hospital, where he lay unconscious for 7 days. The damage to his head seemed to be at the front, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and responsibility, impulse control and decision-making. When Fred was better and came home, his father would often say that he didn't feel Fred was the same person. It was almost like his personality had changed. He also now walked with a limp. And as people started bullying or teasing him for the limp, the first signs of aggression were evident as Fred started to stand up for himself, a side that before now people had never seen. In 1960, aged 18, Fred had met another girl. Now her name was Rena Costello. She was 16 and had grown up near Glasgow. She was from a broken home. She had committed some kind of crime, but it's not known what. And after going to court, she had spent some time in Borstal prison. Now living with relatives in England, Rena and Fred were always together. They got on well. They were both tearaways and were rarely seen apart. But Rita had low self-image, self-worth, and for some reason allowed herself to be kind of used by men. It gave her a personality boost, getting the attention. Unfortunately, it was the wrong kind of attention. The couple spent much time in the woods, sleeping together and getting up to all sorts. But after a short time, Fred grew jealous of Rena speaking to anyone other than him, and the couple argued. Not long after this, Rena moved back to Scotland to be with her family. After Rena went home, Fred turned his attention to other girls, putting his hand up one girl's skirt while at the top of a fire escape. When she pushed him away, he ended up falling 10 feet to the concrete bottom. Again, Fred fell unconscious. Again, Fred was taken to hospital, where doctors described him as having some kind of brain damage. Down in Devon, and Bill Letts, Rose's father's mental condition had grown worse, and it was rumoured that he was trying to talk to young children, so they moved their entire family kind of up north, away from the gossip. The family were now living in Bishop's Cleeve in Gloucestershire, and as Rose entered her teenage years, she was by now very interested in meeting boys and very interested in sex. Possibly due to her father, she was more confident at her age than most of her friends. But Rose stripped off naked, walking around the house, parading, especially in front of her father. Now Rose was tough. If any of her friends or younger brothers were in a scrap, Rose would be the first there and the first one to finish it. She had a reputation as someone not to be messed with, and many feared her. Rose then got a job. It was working at a roadside snack bar. She got to meet many older men who came for food, and she would stand and chat to them, arranging to meet up with them after she had finished work. By now, Fred and Rose, although they had still never met, they were only 20 miles apart. Fred West regained consciousness after 24 hours of being in hospital. His family and friends saw another change in his personality and his behaviours. In June 1961, rumours were swirling around the town that Fred, who was now 19, was seeing a 13-year-old girl. But not only that, she was apparently pregnant. When Fred's family found out, they were not happy. His mother was angry. The family knew this girl and her family. His father was also not happy, and it was decided that he had to move out of the home that he shared with his parents. They knew of his pervy ways and did not want any part of it. Now, because this girl was underage, it was not long before police were involved, and a court case started against him, but it collapsed when the young mother refused to give evidence. Police now had Fred on their radar, but he was subsequently released without charge and without any monitoring, and at the time, no SEX register. Not long after the court case, Fred's ex, Rena Costello, entered his life again. She was back from Scotland. It was now 1961, and Rena was taller, had dyed her hair blonde. When she had gone back to Scotland, she had started working the streets, getting pregnant by a bus driver, but they had split up. So she had moved away and back to Ledbury, not far from Fred. She had taken a job in a cafe, but as the couple met up and Rena had told Fred about her unwanted pregnancy, this seemed to excite Fred. He spoke about how he would give her an abortion, and he wanted to perform it himself. He tried to convince Rena, although she thought it sounded crazy. As much as Rena did not want the baby, she was concerned. However, not long after this, Fred took Rena to a nearby wooded area where he started trying to perform it. I'm not quite sure what that involved, but the couple were spotted, and wondering what they were doing, a concerned female contacted the police. Not long after this, Rena decided to keep the child, and Fred made her his wife. The couple moved back to Glasgow to be near Rena's family, and she gave birth to the baby, calling it Charmaine. Fred was now bringing up another man's child, although he got very jealous over the time Rena spent with the baby and the fact that she never seemed to put the baby down. He also got angry and very frustrated when it cried, and in the end, needing the cash, Rena went back to work, working the streets. But this seemed to excite Fred, knowing that she was with other men, but she was coming home to him. When Rena was at home, Fred would grab her from behind when she was cooking or washing up, lifting up her skirt and basically raping her often. It seemed to excite him, but over time, he found it harder and harder to perform, as if he needed something else to excite him. Fred and his family visited his parents back in England, where he boasted about being a PIMP and that he was living this high life, that he was involved in the underworld, and made up all sorts of strange fictional things that were going on in his life that were just not actually happening. Fred actually worked as an ice cream man down in Glasgow. It was a perfect way to meet new girls and chat them up and arrange to meet them. In the Gorbals in Glasgow in the 1960s, it was an area in Glasgow, things were about to change, as this area at the time was known for crime gangs who habited and ran that area. Fred's ice cream van route took him through that area, and people heard about how he would chat up young girls. He even had them working with him in his van. Now, one day, a young boy said something to him about being into the young girls, basically calling him a perv, and Fred flipped out, literally threatening to throttle him with this piece of string that he had in his hand. In 1964, Rena had given birth to Fred's first child, who they named Anne-Marie. It seemed that Fred doted on her. It was a stark contrast to his way that he had been with Rena's daughter Charmaine. Now, Charmaine was shouted at, she was hit, she was pushed around and told to go away, whereas he had all the time in the world for Anne-Marie. Now, during this time, Rena knew that Fred was being unfaithful, that he was meeting young girls, and so she started her own relationship with a bus driver named John. She seemed to have a thing for bus drivers. She met up with him in secret and really liked him. She thought about how differently John treated her to Fred. One night she had arranged to meet John, but Fred had found out about the affair and he followed Rena to where she was meeting up with John. He waited until the two embraced and shouted at the pair, asking what on earth was going on. He punched Rena several times in the face, full force, knocking her to the ground, telling her to get home before pushing her in the direction of home. But that was not all. He had brought a sharp instrument with him and basically slashed John, a threat to stay away. Rena did stay with Fred after this, although he became very controlling towards her, basically not wanting her out of his sight. He built a slatted cage that he would use to put Charmaine in, so that she couldn't get out, and hired a nanny to look after the girls. The nanny was mortified to see how the children were being locked away and how they were being treated. Fred had taken her on because she was young and pretty. In 1965, whilst driving his ice cream van around the estates of Glasgow, he knocked over a 4-year-old boy. Unfortunately, this little boy did not survive. No charges were ever brought to Fred, as it was looked on as an accident. But the locals were angry and wanted revenge. People were already discussing Fred. They'd already been talking about him and the young girls, telling their own to stay away from him. He really did not have a good reputation at all. It was getting worse. Gang members were even walking the streets, asking kids if they'd seen Fred on his rounds, and told them he would pay them money if they saw him. So everyone had their eye out for Fred because money was involved. Everyone was talking about him, but Fred did not know this. So as Fred parked up his van and started serving ice cream, he happened to look to the side and see a load of men running from all directions towards his van with sharp instruments and pieces of wood. Fred quickly got in the front seat and sped away as quickly as he could. He knew his time in Glasgow was up, and he needed to move away and fast. Fred, Rena and the children fled south. They were now not far from Muchmarkle and had moved into a static caravan. Again, although Fred and Rose had still never met, he was now only 12 miles from where she lived. Fred now took on a job working in an abattoir. He learnt how to handle the carcasses, how to remove the meat and gristle from the bones, and he apparently really enjoyed the work. I mean, he had previously worked on a farm with his dad, so it was kind of nothing new to him. The relationship between Rena and Fred was still not great. The arguing had been too much, and Rena had spent some time away in Scotland with the children, visiting relatives. One day in June, Rena returned, but this time she had brought back the children and two friends, Isa, the family's former nanny, and Anna McFall, a girl that Fred had previously been attracted to and was only 16. Rena moved her friends into the static caravan with Fred and the children, and Fred became increasingly violent and increasingly controlling, telling Rena she was not allowed to leave the caravan while he was at work and wanted to know where she was at all times. But behind the scenes, Anna of the girls had started to catch feelings for Fred. She longed for him to come home, looking out of the window and waiting for him to arrive back. Fred would come home, and if his dinner was not on the table waiting for him, he would become angry. He would slap Rena about, lifting a hand to her on a regular basis. She felt increasingly isolated, but was happy that she had two friends with her. Rena and the former nanny Isa tried to think of ways that they could escape Fred. When Rena decided to call her former bus driver lover John, she told him what was happening with Fred and that it was not good, that she couldn't put up with it anymore, and John offered to come and rescue her. So a plan was set in motion. The plan was that they would wait for Fred to go to work as usual, and then John and his friend would pull up outside in a car. The girls would run out and get in. That day, when Fred went to work as usual, the girls quickly threw everything into bags. John pulled up outside to rescue them, but possibly tipped off by the other girl, Anna, who had been quietly getting to know Fred, must have tipped him off. Fred appeared running towards the caravan. "What's going on here then?" he said. Rena told him, "I'm not putting up with this anymore. I've had enough." A fight broke out, with Fred refusing to allow Rena or the children to go. The girls in the end were able to leave. They got into the car, but Fred ended up with the two children. He refused to let them go. Even Charmaine, who wasn't Fred's child, the one that he had never even had time for, but he refused to let the children go and wanted to keep both of them. So the car drove off with the girls inside, leaving Fred stood there with the children and Anna, who had refused to leave Fred. Anna now became Fred's new lover, but at 16, she struggled to become a full-time housewife and mother to two young children. Fred went to social services and put the girls into care, but then he would eventually go back and get them. This happened various times, which must have set off some kind of alarm bells in social services. But whatever the case, no one seemed to intervene, and yet again the children would be taken home with Fred and Anna. Later that summer, Rena returned home to confront Fred. The time away had helped boost her confidence, and she was ready to confront him and reclaim her children. Rena walked straight into the caravan. "Did you miss me?" she said, before grabbing her two girls and walking out of the caravan. Fred did not put up much of a fight, probably because he didn't really want the girls there anyway. The one thing the couple did not know was that as Rena was leaving, she grabbed a few of Anna's personal items off the side. Now Rena and the children left. They fled back to Scotland to be near her family. When Fred and Anna realised that these items were missing, they went straight to the police to report the theft, and not long after this, a police officer interviewed Rena down at her local station. PC Hazel asked Rena if she had taken the items and why. Rena literally admitted the theft and explained that the woman was sleeping with her husband and she had taken the items out of spite. But it was then that Rena would also tell the officer about how violent Fred was towards her and the children. She also told the officer that Fred was not normal in the bedroom and that he had certain depraved things that got him off. PC Hazel documented everything Rena said, and unbeknown to police at the time, this information would help bring Fred to justice in the future and help uncover hidden bodies within his property. In November 1966, Rena was given 3 years probation for the theft. For some reason, Rena decided to start spending time at the caravan again when Anna wasn't there. Fred was struggling to juggle the two women, especially when he found out that Anna was pregnant with his child and had started talking about the couple getting married. Fred did not want Rena to find out about Anna's pregnancy or the fact that she was still coming to the caravan. Fred and Rose's meeting was still 2 years away, but for now his loyalty lay with his wife Rena, and he didn't want to lose her. Fred was struggling to know what to do about pregnant Anna. If Rena found out, he may lose her for good. He needed to make a decision and fast. And then, in July 1967, Anna would just go missing. No one reported her missing, and Rena, of course, did not know that Anna had even been there. Fred kept his mouth shut. Where could she be? Anna's letters to her family suddenly stopped arriving, and family wondered if she had just moved on. Life went on as usual. Now Fred did not need to creep around. The family moved into a new caravan, and this time in Bishop's Cleeve. It was a new start, and for a while Rena, Fred and the girls seemed to live in relative peace. But this caravan was literally on the doorstep to Rose Letts, unbeknown to him at the time, but soon Rena would also be the next girl to go missing, and 15-year-old Rose would soon become Rose West. Between the couple, they would go on to take the lives of at least 12 young girls between 1967 and 1987. This is the end of part 1. Part 2 will cover in detail the meeting of Fred and Rose West and what they go on to do between the years of 1967 and 1987 and how everything is uncovered. Part 2 to follow.